Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Thrive Co-Living Communities YouTube podcast. I'm Mark Stein, Thrive founder and your podcast host. We're creating sustainable, inclusive, and multi-generational residential communities. Our mission is to combat the epidemic of isolation, revitalize communities, and help others discover the many benefits of engaged community living by offering unique and ecologically sustainable co-living options. In this podcast series, join us as we discuss co-living, in addition to bringing you interesting people from around the world who are doing cool things to expand your knowledge and satisfy your curiosity. Through this podcast, learn more about our concept and see how Thrive co-living communities will bring together people from all walks of life who want to enjoy the best of independent and group living. To find out more about us, please visit our website at thrivecolivingcommunities.org. Thanks for watching and enjoy the podcast. Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the Thrive Co-Living Communities YouTube podcast. Glad to have you all here and glad to have my friend Chris Isgrigg returning to the podcast. Chris, welcome back.
Thanks. Good to be here, Mark.
So Chris has a passion, amongst other things, many other things, a passion about permaculture, sustainability, the environment, those sorts of things. And so I wanted to have him come back on. Be sure to note the last podcast where we talked in more general terms and with some specificity about permaculture, and maybe we'll let Chris give us a working definition, not a dictionary definition, of how he sees permaculture sustainability, and that may be the best way to get started on it. What do you think, Chris?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the definition of permaculture, like what comes to mind are the sort of the three ethical qualities of permaculture, which is people care, earth care, and fair share. So, if with those as the guiding ethics, everything else kind of falls underneath that. And of course, it's got the 12. Sometimes it's more. There's more than 12, or sometimes less than 12 principles of permaculture, depending on who you ask. But the originators, Bill Mollison, came up with 12. And it's basically a way of looking at things systemically. Typically, it's applied to things like gardening and energy, but it really can be applied to any field. To looking at things systemically, and yeah, I mean, like, we can get into the weeds of all that, but that's the general definition, if you will. I mean, there's probably a really good working definition somewhere that I don't have at my fingertips.
And in terms of, let's say, site selection, let's say you're choosing a place to live. To me, it's all about, or my understanding is, it's all about place and our relation to place and our relation to different subsections of our place. And I know that it's recommended that you spend an entire year, all 4 seasons, spending time at a place to see where the sun hits, how the wind is affected, and really it's all about, I think, our relation to our place and where we are.
Yeah, absolutely. That's one of the principles, which is observe and interact. And so that observation for the first year, typically the first year, because then you get to see the place in all the different seasons. And as you said, knowing where the sun is, what's going to be in shade and what's going to be in sun and what times of day and during the year, like how the water flows on the land. Yeah, and then the interact part is you start to well, interact. So planting a garden and seeing how it goes in a certain place, and then you get into things like zones and microclimates. You know, for instance, just to give a brief example, I've got some raised beds that are facing, they're not, the long side of the bed is south facing. So the other side is north facing. And then in the, in the wintertime, if it snows, you can really see this because the snow will melt on the south side, almost in like a perfect straight line down the bed. And then you still have snow on the other side. So it gives you an idea that like, it might not be that much different, but on one of those days where it's hovering around 32 and the sun's out, it'll melt the snow on one side and not on the other. And so that's going to affect how plants grow on one side and on the other, and what you're going to plant where. Mm-hmm. So I might plant in the, in the spring, I might plant my lettuce on that north side, so it sits a little bit cooler during the summer and it won't bolt. So that's the interact piece of it. And then, just making adjustments. The observation is continuous. And so you're absolutely right. The relationship is key, how we relate to the land, because typically what we'll do is, as modern Westerners, we tend to be impositional, and we look at a place and we go, well, I want this here and this here and this here, and then we impose our will upon the land instead of working with the features and other beings that are there as well. Mm-hmm. And that's that's where you get into the ethics of things, and what is it? And I guess some people are okay with that, but you're not going to be doing permaculture if you're doing that. But
think of the way the modern subdivision is created, where they go in, they plow everything down, then they plant some lollipop trees in the front yard, and it's all about just fitting in what they want to fit in their design, that has nothing to do with place, the environment, what exists there currently.
Yeah, and you might remember a few years ago, I'm not sure when, maybe 2015, 2016, I don't know, there was some pretty severe flooding in Houston. And a lot of that was caused by like the way that there's so much concrete, and the way they tried to manage the water flow. They just tried to impose their will on the place, and Mother Nature said, guess what? I get to bat last. So yeah, we end up with all kinds of erosion problems and flooding, and multiple layers of problems based on that sort of broken relationship that we have.
Give us some examples. We spoke just briefly before we started the podcast, and you're in heavy garden planning mode and getting ready to plant. Folks, he's in Louisville, Kentucky area. So talk about what you're looking at, what you're planning for your garden, how this is permaculture and sustainability, and we can move into that too, sort of in and out. But it's a mindset. It's a way of thinking, mm-hmm. and an approach. So talk a little bit about how you're approaching your garden, and maybe we can even I'll throw you a curve. Maybe we can even move to Zoom on your phone for part of the conversation, and you can go walk us around.
Yeah, I can do that.
At what you've got.
It's raining.
Take an umbrella. Anyway, so just talk about it.
Yeah. So I can tell you what. Well, so first of all, I live on an 1.5 acres in an old farmhouse. The house was built in 1899. And speaking of subdivisions, the farm is now a subdivision that's behind my house. And it's got a lot of old maple trees and yes, and it's got it had an outbuilding in the back that I converted to a chicken coop. So I've got 10 chickens, and I'll tell you about the chickens. There's a little funny anecdote about the chickens here in a minute. But yeah, so I've got three beds that I've created using wood chips and manure, and they're about 5 feet wide, and each of them is 90 feet long. And in them they've got fruit trees and hazelnuts and blueberries. And then between two of them, I've got grapes that I planted last year. And some of it was just an experiment that I did. And I didn't really know how it was going to turn out because I planted the fruit trees, and then I sort of built, I put wood chips around them as mulch. And then I thought, well, I should add some manure. And then I thought, well, I can just extend this bed from one tree to the other and grow perennials in between. So I've got one in the front yard that has a couple apple trees, a plum tree, and a peach tree. And then in between them, it's got asparagus and strawberries. Yeah, so, and this is only 2 years old, and the wood chips and manure, so the wood chips are wonderful because I get them free. You can get them free. This is a good plug right here. You can get them free through an organization called Chip Drop, which is nationwide to my knowledge. And so what they do is they set up, arborists will go and sign up, and then people that want chips just request a drop. And so the arborists typically have to go dump those somewhere and pay to dump them after they cut down a tree and chip it up. So if they can have somebody nearby that they can go dump it on their property, that saves them money. And then you get a full free truckload of wood chips if you got room for them. So I've done that 3 times and to build soil. And initially when they're fresh, that first year they'll absorb nitrogen. So it's not really good to put them on the garden where you're going to be planting things that year. So it's good to let it sit for a while and mix it with something that has nitrogen in it. So I mix it with chicken manure and horse manure. And after 2 years, it's just beautiful soil. And I didn't have to dig anything. I just laid it down on the ground and let it rot. I mean, I've got to weed it, but and last year I just took all the leaves from the maple trees and put that on top, and then manure on top of that in the spring, and it's already rotted down. So it turns out to be, without very much effort, really beautiful soil. So one of the things I'm trying to do is build capacity to be, I almost said to be productive, which is, that's kind of a machine way of looking at things. In my mind, it's more like, how can I support more life? How can I increase the potential for biomass here on this 1.5 acres? And so that's one thing that I've done. And just recently, I built another hugelkultur bed, which involves, you can do it a couple ways. The way I've done it is hugelkultur is basically you bury organic material, mainly wood, but other things like that, and then put dirt on top of it, soil on top of it, and then inside that wood, the wood holds water and provides a place for the microbiome to grow, and all the creepy crawlies and fungus and everything that and worms that build soil, and then it becomes soil. So it's like it's a great way of, I mean, it's a lot of work to do in the beginning, because what I do is I dig where the bed's going to be. It'll be about 5 feet by 20, and I'll dig it down 1 foot and take that soil and place it on the side, all that topsoil, and then I'll take logs and bury the logs, and then rotted wood and wood chips to fill in all the nooks and crannies, and then put the soil back on top of it. And so the first year you've broken the soil, so there's all kinds of nitrogen available. in that soil you put back on. And then after that, it starts to feed itself. So you've got a bed that you don't have to keep breaking the soil on. You can just, like what I do is I add a layer of manure in the spring, maybe some wood chips in the fall, plant a cover crop. And that way the soil structure stays pretty intact, and you don't disrupt the mycelial growth, and you don't kill worms and that as you're tilling or hoeing up the soil. So that's, I've been doing that. I planted 180 onions the other day and planted lettuce and brassicas, and then the chickens got out and got in the garden and dug up half the onions and ate all the brassicas. Like stuff I started indoors in February it's all gone. Like it only got this big, and the chickens ate most of it. And that's my chicken story. So they're wonderful, right? They provide us with eggs and chicken manure, and to a certain degree they can. I mean, this gets into issues of permaculture and sustainability and working with cycles, right? So if I can find a way to, I buy food for them, but the more that I can have them produce food here for them to eat, like maybe let the brassicas get a little bit bigger than they did, then they eat what's growing here. They provide eggs and manure. The manure goes back in the garden, and then that grows something that they eat again, and you get that cycle where it's a closed cycle, and you don't have to worry about inputs off the farm, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
I consider my little acre and a half a farm.
I forget, does the onion taste and smell get into the eggs?
They don't. I don't know. They don't eat the onions. They just were happy to get out into that soft soil and scratch. So they didn't eat them. They just scratched them all up. They did eat. Yeah. They ate the Brussels sprouts, broccoli, cabbage, and kale, and some of the lettuce.
I've got a good chicken story. My farm partner has chickens, and this latest batch, he also put this elaborate chicken wire fencing up above it, sort of looks like an aviary, to protect them from hawks and the other predators. But he decided with this new batch of chickens, he would name them all Sally. So that way, if a chicken got killed, got killed, who was it? Oh, it was Sally. So I think it keeps him from getting too attached to any one. Oh, they're all Sally. So.
Yeah, I've got an 8-year-old daughter, and we've got names for all of them. Yeah.
Back to the beds and the wood chips. I know that you don't use them to garden first year because they've got to be really hot. That area has to be really hot. But what about pH? And I never learned proper soil balance of pH. Does it stay a little on the hot side for a couple of years, and you have to balance that out to bring the pH?
So do you mean by hot, do you mean acidic or?
Yeah.
Well, typically, like the stuff I grow wants to be a little acidic, and I don't worry too much about it. Like I don't test pH. I'm using mostly natural materials for fertilization. So like horse manure is not real high. So there's pH, and then there's nitrogen levels. We often, when I hear hot, I think of things in terms of how much nitrogen is there. So horse manure that's composted is not hot. It's like 1% nitrogen, I think. I don't know. I mean, there's lots of other stuff in it as well that's good for the soil, carbon and phosphorus and potassium and micronutrients. And the wood chips are mostly carbon, to my knowledge. I mean, honestly, I really don't know. But let's see, where was I?
Yeah, it's about
So pH is is different from hot. So hot is too much nitrogen. So like I put natural fertilizer down with the horse manure and chicken manure. Now chicken manure, especially uncomposted chicken manure, is very hot. If you put it out, if you side dress your plants with fresh chicken manure, you'll burn them up. They'll just die. But maybe, you know, like they won't do well. They're going to struggle with too much nitrogen. So you want to make sure that's good and composted before you. So I usually when I clean out the coop, I put that during the summer. I put that on the compost pile, which stimulates the compost, the other things that I've got in there. And then in the fall and winter, I'll put that out on the beds directly, so that because it's hot, it doesn't matter unless I've got a cover crop on there. Usually I'll put it underneath the wood chips, and then the wood chips will soak up that nitrogen and kind of store it for me. Yeah, so I don't like, as far as like, you know, if you're worried about pH and stuff like that, it's typically if you're using, I mean, you could be using organic fertilizers, but if you're using concentrated fertilizers, trying to think of like blood meal or maybe cottonseed meal. Like cottonseed meal is acidic. It'll increase your pH or lower it, depending on, I forget which way. Acidic, I guess, I think is lower than 7. But yeah, the way I test it is putting plants in there, and if they're not growing right, then I know something's wrong. Yeah. You know, if they're bright green, and you know, like during vegetative growth, for instance, peppers and tomatoes and squash, those vines are growing, plants are growing. If they're good and green and vigorous, then I know it's okay. If not, it's like, okay, something's off. And usually it's because I don't add that much. It's usually not enough.
So what are you thinking about? Let's pull out from the micro a little bit. What are you thinking about these days in terms of sustainability? Just what's on your mind, because you're looking at life through this lens.
Yeah.
And I do too. And I'm always looking, okay, what can I put back? How can I reuse this? Recently, I took, for a while with my soap, I put all the slivers into a little baggy sort of thing and used them, and it didn't work very well. So I put them all in a bowl in the microwave and and melted them all down. It was this great foam. What's the thing that you drop a tablet in a soft drink or something, and have this huge?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I know what you're talking about. It's like a Mentos or something. It's candy.
Right. Yeah. So this, I used a microwave safe bowl, and all of the colors swirled together, and it was this huge blob. Fortunately, it didn't overflow. And then when it settled back down, it was this beautiful swirl of mixtures of soap. And then I just cut it into cubes, and now I'm able to use it, you know, grab the bar again.
Nice. Yeah.
And now I'm starting I've got a new batch of about 4 of the little slivers. So I think when you have this mindset, you're always looking at life. Okay, what can I do with this? And anyway, so what are you thinking and pondering in terms of sustainability? And circle of life.
Yeah, you know, I mean, what you just said there, like it's about relationship again, you know, and so, you know, from a Buddhist perspective, there's, you know, the Eightfold Path of Buddhism, there's right relationship. That's part of it. And so it's not just how we relate to each other, it's how we relate to the world that's the non-human world, all the other beings and all the other, you know, and so I tend to, you know, come from an animist perspective that the world is alive and everything in it is alive, not just the things that we consider biologically alive. And so treating those things with respect, treating the soap with respect, You know, and it's in its essence, its purpose is to clean you, and it's like if you throw it away, you know, that little sliver at the end, it's that's disrespectful because it can't fulfill its purpose. So yeah, just a little commentary there on the lens that we're talking about. And so, I mean, you know, you said you were interested in what people, when we talked before the recording started, what people are thinking about right now. And, you know, we're recording this on what's the 13th of April, 2022. And we're just sort of at the tail end of the pandemic, I guess. And we've been through 2 years of all kinds of disruption. And now there's a war going on in Europe. And that's causing disruption. Like both of these situations cause disruption in, I mean, everybody knows this now, in supply chains, right? And so if you order something, it might take longer to get it. If you, especially if you want a car, like half the microchips in the world are made in Taiwan. And if there's a disruption from, you know, political disruption with China, or, you know, some other kind of economic situation, or just supply chains, having cargo ships sitting offshore and not being able to unload, all these kinds of things will disrupt the flow of our economy. And our economy has become, you know, what is it? Is it FedEx or UPS, where it's the motto is the world on time, you know, and it's like everything gets there just on time. And we've been really, it's really fascinating how adept we are at creating this system. And I almost think at a certain point, like the system is creating itself, because nobody understands exactly how these supply chains work from beginning to end. There's so many moving parts. And it's just been like, anyway, we don't need to go into that too deep. But my point is, you take that situation, you take the war in Ukraine. So Russia is the top producer in the world of wheat, and Ukraine is the third top producer in the world of wheat. And so, especially in Ukraine, those crops are not going to necessarily be going in, especially in the eastern part of the country. The eastern part of the country. So in Russia, the crops will go in, but like, well, you know, who's Russia going to sell it to, right? And what's the, you know, and if you think in terms of energy and fossil fuels and pipelines and all that's being disrupted as well. So you add all that together with climate disruption, and we've got almost a perfect storm. And you know, inflation is looming, energy prices are going up. And so what's on my mind is, which it's always what's on my mind, it's just even more to the forefront given these situations that we're facing. What's on my mind is resilience. Like, how do I, and I think of that in terms of concentric circles. So like, how do I, in my own person, how do I maintain my own resilience? And then from there, it branches out to my family. And I mean, yeah, my immediate family, my wife and my daughter here in this household, and the place we live. And then it goes to friends and extended family from there. And so I'm not really doing anything differently, but I do have more of a sense of urgency about it. You know, like maybe I am doing things differently. I planted twice as many onions, and I'm going to plant, you know, we've been here, this will be the 4th growing season here. And I kind of know what's going to, like what we're good at producing here, and what we eat a lot of, and what stores well. So winter squash and onions and garlic, some shallots. You know, I bought I didn't want to buy an electric one, but I actually got it for Christmas, a food dehydrator. So I'll dehydrate a lot of the extra stuff that we don't eat that usually we would give it away. We'll still be giving things away, but or we'd give like the tomatoes that weren't that great, we give them to the chickens because they love them. And we'll probably still do that too. But I might focus more on what we're going to eat, what we tend to eat more of, and save some of it through canning and dehydrating and things like that to create more resilience as food prices go up, and potentially shortages. I don't suspect that there'll be severe or disastrous shortages in the short term, but I'm always thinking in terms of, again, like I said, like when I think about this place, how much, how can I interact with it in a way that brings more life, that brings more biomass, without having to bring too many things off site. So the wood chips are all off site, but I mean, in some ways, one of the trees that was cut down was chipped up here. It was our tree, and then the last thing of wood chips I got were like a neighbor two or three houses over last summer. So they're off site, but not far. My point is I'm trying to create capacity, which creates resilience.
And even if you're not planting a maximum amount, you're still building soil to be able to plant more later on.
Yeah,
and
absolutely. That's a super important point. A lot of maybe some of the folks that are listening to this might be familiar with the writer Wendell Berry, who lives just up the river from Louisville, who says that basically a farmer's main crop is the soil. Like, so, because, and maybe this gets into issues of sustainability, because we live in an industrial economic paradigm, which is extractive, and that includes farming. So if you look at some of the biggest, like the bigger farms, you get, there's lots of nitrogen that's thrown on the soil that is a petroleum product. And so are a lot of the pesticides and herbicides that are used. And a lot of that kills the microbiome in the soil. So the soil becomes dead. It becomes or at least it has very little life in it compared to the vibrant soil that you would find in a hugelkultur bed.
Are you saying Google? As in
Hugel. It's a German word. It's Hugelkultur.
Okay.
Hugelkultur. There's an umlaut there over the U, I think.
Okay. Sorry, go ahead.
No, that's all right. That's an important. I mean, a lot of people don't know what hugelkultur is, so like I should have defined my terms there. But yeah, so like if you're the problem is that soil becomes less and less and less productive, and you're just using it as a substrate to grow things. Like, and you're using all these artificial or chemicals that are produced using petroleum products to, so essentially you end up eating oil. And as we know, oil is a finite resource. So if you want to talk about sustainability, like you have to totally find a way out of factory farming and industrial farming, which is it's more akin to mining than it is agriculture.
Let's plug his book, The Unsettling of America.
Oh man, it's awesome. Yeah, classic.
That was what literally drove me to the land, or back to the land. Probably early 1980s, published, maybe even late 70s. But
yeah,
that's
close.
The farmer in terms of husbandry and nurturer. He totally flips the whole concept of modern agriculture and relates it to culture. Wonderful, wonderful book. And I haven't picked it up lately, but I bet it still holds up. And I bet it's even more crucial because we probably, in terms of mass scale, we haven't adopted, this much of it. So
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's a seminal work for sure. It probably is. I don't know. I mean, he's written so much, and I love everything he's written, including his poetry and fiction, which has the same thematic elements in it. But his work on it basically his cultural critique is super important, I think, and that's probably The Unsettling of America is probably, I would say, it's his most important book. I mean, other people might disagree, including Wendell Berry himself, but
so let's plug him as a Kentuckian, because I feel like, other than the environmentalist not purist, but enthusiast, he's still not that well known outside of Kentucky, but he really did some important work.
Yeah, I might push back on that a little bit. I think he is
okay.
well known outside of Kentucky. I mean, I've spoken with. I remember speaking with a German person in Germany. I had the book, and he's like, "Oh, Wendell Berry," and so yeah. And if you go to, for instance, I was in City Lights bookstore in San Francisco. I mean, this is 25 or 30 years ago, but like there's a whole Wendell Berry section there, or there was. So like he's more better known than you might think. But yeah, let's plug him as a Kentuckian for a true son of Kentucky, Wendell Berry.
Mm-hmm. What about we're continuing to ponder different residences and different types of residences for our future Thrive locations. And I don't know how much you're focused on it, but I'm really seeing a lot of innovation in terms of small sustainable housing. The affordability crisis, especially on the West Coast, is tremendous. There's been some new enabling legislation to let people put ADUs, alternative dwelling units, on their own property in the backyard, to
like tiny houses and such like.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'm seeing a lot of work around pre-manufactured or manufactured homes that are very energy self-sufficient, very creative. Boxable is the one that I'm following the closest. For the audience, boxabl.com. But I've also and YouTube. Let me plug YouTube. YouTube is so wonderful. I'll express an interest, just a little bit of an interest, and then it'll feed me some things. I'm seeing some domes, Pacific Dome Company up in the Northwest, that seems to be building just a beautiful product. And the beauty and the symmetry and in the enclosing of a maximum amount of space with the dome configuration. I don't know. Are you, I know you have your home, and you're probably continuing to button up and tighten up your home, but are you focused on spaces and energy efficient spaces? Is this something you're looking into as well?
Yeah, there's a really great book. I think you can get it for the PDF for free online, but now I'm gonna forget it. It's either Retro Suburbia or Retrofitting Suburbia by David Holmgren, who's he's the co-originator of Permaculture with Bill Mollison, and I think it's a wonderful book because it gives you the premise is that you start with what you have instead of trying to come up with this, from the ground up kind of, buy a piece of land, build a house, maybe it's a boxable house or one of those domes or something, and have everything be picture perfect, permaculture rich kind of way of living. It's a more realistic way, and it's also addressing the fact that most people do not live in the country. They live in the city or in suburban areas, and so the idea of retrofitting what's already here. So like I said, my house was built in 1899, so it's 123 years old. It's not a young house. So, and it depends on what your financial means are. We've been lucky enough to be able to do things like replace all the windows in the house. We blew in like an extra 1.5 feet of insulation in the attic. I have no idea what kind of insulation there is in the walls, probably not very much. And that's a project that's, you can only do so much at a time, but that's something to look into as well. So like tightening up your existing structure. We got a new roof on it and better ventilation. So in the summertime, it won't, we won't have as much heat retention up there.
What is your siding? That really determines how easy it is to blow in insulation in the sides. What's the siding?
Yeah, it's got the original, I guess it's kind of like shiplap laps, yeah, on the side, and then it's got, the previous owners put vinyl siding over the top of that. So I imagine there's probably a thin layer of insulation between there. Oftentimes builders will put those sheets of insulating material up before they put up the vinyl. My goal is to take all that off and blow in insulation, and then I don't know. I mean, it's ideally, yeah. Well, there's all kinds of different ways you can do that, but yeah, somehow improve it. We put new doors in as well, tighten up. But I think what I find so attractive about that book and all the concepts in it is it's starting with what you've got and working from there. And there's a maybe we mentioned it in the previous podcast, but I'm a psychotherapist, and so I deal with people in addiction recovery a lot. And there's a good saying in there, which is progress, not perfection, or perfection is the enemy of progress. And so I think that's a good way of looking at it. Like, we don't have to be perfect. There's so much work to do, and every little bit that we do counts. Like the less energy you use, the less items you buy, the less you drive, all of that, like less is better.
Mm-hmm. And as a good example of that, we had a researcher on that did research in terms of the environmental impact of co-living. And some co-living buildings, housing, are more focused on energy efficiency and sustainability. But what she found was just the fact that you've got more people living in the same amount of space, dramatically reduces the amount of energy used per person. So
yes,
even if they don't do anything in terms of tightening up and insulating, it still is more efficient and is using less resources per person, or less energy per person.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's like, I think, in Louisville, if you go downtown or in one of the first suburban areas here in town, the Highlands, it's like a lot of those houses are multi-generational. They were built for multi-generational families. So like, you'd have grandma and grandpa, and then you'd have mom and dad, then you have the kids. And sometimes, if the generations are close enough together, you might even have 4 generations living in one house. And I mean, that's good energetically, it's good socially, it's good, especially good for the kids developmentally. There's all kinds of positive things about co-living, whether it's with a family or more, build from the ground up kind of intentional community. I mean, I'm sure, and you guys deal with all the pitfalls psychologically and socially, and we don't need to go into that because that's not the topic here. But apart from that, like, you're absolutely right. It's fewer. It takes fewer calories to if you've got 4 people living in a house versus 3, it's less calories per person with 4. Mm-hmm. The other thing I'd say is it's not just that, but you know, if I've got, say, a particular set of tools or resources that I own, like say one person has a generator and one person has a chainsaw and one person has a lot of construction type of stuff, then it's like we don't have to go buy, everybody doesn't have to have their own thing, because and again it's like the more we buy, you know, the problem with, I mean, this is probably apparent to everybody who's listening to this, but you know, if things are extractive and we keep buying all these goods, like this, even if it's stuff like boxable or those domes, like if you're using materials that are being extracted from the earth, if we keep treating the earth like it's our own, like all it is a lumber yard and a gravel pit, then there is no sustainability. Like that is not sustainable. It never will be. And we're starting to bump up against those limits. That's not to denigrate boxable or you know, that's probably miles better than some of like the McMansions that you see built, you know, like at this point, like it's not even suburbs, it's like the exurbs that are beyond the suburbs, and people commute into the center of the town. All the materials being used there, it's just the same. So smarter use of the materials is better for sure. But we ultimately, like, there's nothing sustainable about that. And when I hear sustainability, I gotta throw my critical hat in the ring here. When I think of sustainability and the way it's bandied about in the media, what I think is that people want to, like, how do I sustain this current lifestyle that I have? And you won't, unless, and the only way to sustain it is on the backs of other people and by extracting from the plants and animals and earth herself to our own detriment eventually. I mean, not to mention all the people around the world that, you know, that we don't have to go into that, but
and the planet's pushing back, you know.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Global warming is the planet saying enough, you can't keep doing this, and we're going to push back.
Yeah, I mean, you could even potentially, I'm not sure about this, put COVID in that, put the pandemic in that, you know, pushback as well, like, because it's a globalized system. So what started in China all of a sudden was everywhere, right? And it's like, if we didn't have a globalized system, that would not have been the case. It's hard for us to imagine, you know, what it was like before things were globalized, because really globalization probably started with the East India Company 500 plus years ago. But yeah, I mean, there was a thriving.
I think the last pandemic did spread, but probably not as fast and not as furiously, because it wasn't.
Yeah, like the Spanish flu epidemic. Yeah, I mean, it. Well, I don't know much about it except it's, you know, World War I, and so you have a lot of people moving around, troops and things like that, carrying it back and forth across the ocean.
Before we wrap up, and I always enjoy our conversations, and we meander amongst a lot of different topics. But anything else that's been on your mind that you want to share? Well, let me point you. What about in terms of your work and psychologically, and how people are coming out of the pandemic, or just any themes that you're seeing amongst your clients?
Yeah, so, you know, during the pandemic, almost all of my work was via this, you know, a similar platform to the way you and I are talking right now. And then last summer, I started seeing some people outside, you know, to make sure that it was we could see each other in person, but it was safe. And now that things are pretty much opened up, and So the school, kind of my litmus test for safety is the school system here has said that masks are optional. So it's like, okay, that tells me that that we're in a situation where I can operate out of my office. And so one of the things that if we think about right relationship as the lens we're looking through things, then anything that stands in the way or obstructs or creates an obstacle for a relationship, if we can remove it, let's remove it. And so meeting in person is important. So I have, I guess it was about a month ago, I basically said, to all my clients and anybody that's, new clients that I get, that you've got an option. If you're worried about getting sick, we can meet outside. There's a little park not too far from my office. Or we can meet in my office. And I'm only going to do telehealth as, in unique situations, like your kid's sick at home and you still want to have your therapy session, but you can't leave your child, that kind of thing. Or like your work schedule this week is you can only make it during these times and you wouldn't be able to make it to the office because of drive time. Then, I'll work with people, but essentially it's like, we need to, one of the problems we have is the disintegration of community, which I think is like what you're trying to, with Thrive is trying to build community. And so I am too, and in a small way, by like saying we've got to remove these obstacles that separate us. There's all kinds of things that happen relationally that between two people when they're communicating with one another that are completely filtered out or are extremely watered down if you're communicating through a device instead of
seeing this much
right
of the person.
Right. Yeah, because we can go into depth in this, but I'll just say mirror neurons for one. It's like that's one of the things that doesn't get totally wiped out through this medium, but we don't feel it as much. Like I guess I would just encourage people to notice the difference. I'm sure they do. A lot of people have spent a lot of time online talking to other people now for the past 2 years. And just to notice the difference of meeting someone in person compared to meeting someone virtually, and what it does for us, how it's hard to talk about this without getting into some, I don't know, woo-woo kind of, what people might see as woo-woo kind of thinking, but like energetically, how you feel like on a soul level when you're with somebody compared to when you're not. And it fills us up. It's good for our mental health to actually be with other people. Mm-hmm. Like I've got a lot of clients, especially younger people who, almost all their friends are online. Like they don't even, like they go to work, if they go to work outside their home, and their friends are people that they hang out with online. It's like, you've got to get out into the world, into the 3-dimensional world. Like we've got like one that, yeah, I could go off on another one about the flattening out of culture and how it happens, and the screen is being a perfect symbol for that flatness.
Mm-hmm.
And
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say just one more thing about localism is that if we flatten everything out, whether it's through culture or politics or economy, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it's right or left politics either. If everything ends up being the same and treated the same everywhere, we're going to have big problems because it's not the same everywhere. Again, it's that imposing our will upon reality rather than working with reality and respecting the other beings and people in other places by leaving them alone.
I'll never forget in the heat of COVID, you described one of your counseling sessions with somebody in their pajamas in the bed.
Oh yeah,
and you
It's like
ended
being in
up
bed with them.
laying over so that you could see them upright.
It was like pillow talk or something. It was a strange sensation.
Well, Chris, it's always great to speak with you and hear what you're thinking. And as a fellow ponderer and observer, I really appreciate your perspective and the
Yeah,
breadth
likewise, Mark.
the breadth of conversations that we have. So um, maybe I'll reach out to you periodically, but if you have a lightning bolt of an idea and concept, reach back out to me so that we can get back together and share it, because I'm sure that that our audience who's thinking similar things, that this will spur ideas and tangents for others too. So thank you for sharing.
Yeah, sure. Maybe next time we can talk a little bit about community building. Just generally, I mean, I don't know how it would apply to Thrive necessarily, but there's a really interesting paradigm, or no, it's not paradigm, but process for community building that yeah, we can talk about that next time maybe. I can't remember what it's called, or otherwise I would maybe I'll look it up and you can put it in the show notes, the link to it. But it's
actually, let's plan on it. I'll ask Libby to schedule us in another several months, and let's talk about that, because that's certainly front and center in my mind and in conversations that we're having. It's all about building community. So
yeah. And speaking of alternative housing, I might be building a tiny house as an office instead of renting an office, just to, you know, because I want to build a tiny house.
And would you put it on your property?
Yeah.
There you go. Okay.
I have to move the wood chips first, though.
Okay. Well, thanks again. And thanks everybody for tuning in. If you want to find out more about what we're up to, go to thrivecolivingcommunities.org. In fact, we're about to publish a document with our envisioning of, big air quotes here, an ideal co-living community. So we'll put that in the show notes, and it'll also be on the website. And there are lots of ways you can contribute to what we're doing, and those will also be right down here in the show notes too. So Chris, thanks again. And thanks everybody for tuning in. We're now doing this weekly, so please join us. And one other thing we'll promote is that we're now allowing people to tune in to the recording session and be part of the questioning. So it's not just me asking the questions, although I love that role. So you can look down below and see the calendar and find one of the podcasts that you're interested in, or several of them, and participate live as we do this recording. So Chris, thanks again. And thanks everybody, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for joining us for another great episode of the Thrive Co-Living Communities YouTube podcast. To learn more about our mission and how you can support our vision of creating co-living communities worldwide, please visit us at thrivecolivingcommunities.org. To receive advanced viewings of our podcast and other exclusive content, find us on Patreon at patreon.com/Thrive Co-Living Communities. You can also learn more ways to support our mission in the show notes below. Amazon Smile, GoFundMe, Kroger, and our own Thrive Gear store, where you can buy t-shirts, hats, and many other items. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll look forward to seeing you again soon.